Bien, pues puntuales como cada día vamos a dar comienzo a esta última jornada del Salón Internacional de la Logística. Como sabéis, punto de referencia para el Mediterráneo, para el sur de Europa, también para Latinoamérica. Un evento, un salón que no sería posible sin el apoyo de los patrocinadores que son Metropolis Barcelona, la AMB Cimalsa, Prologis, Project 44, Saba, Ecommerce on Dubai, Barcelona Activa, Linde y la Diputació de Barcelona. Llegados a este punto, antes de continuar, pediros, comentaros que la siguiente sesión, el siguiente panel va a ser en inglés, así que si alguno de vosotros lo necesita, sepáis que tenéis la traducción simultánea a través de la aplicación All You Say, código SIL, PIN 2022. Si lo necesitáis, ya lo sabéis, y a partir de ahí vamos a dar comienzo a este panel. The fight against climate change has become a priority for the Western world and is a fundamental part from the agenda of all European governments. Digitalization and the European Green Deal mustn't be opposite concepts, quite the opposite. Both ideas feed off each other. Those businesses that are able to prove their ecological commitment have and will have an increasingly greater advantage over their competitors. That's because CO2 and greenhouse gas emission will have to be measured on parcel item level. Even more, the electronic freight transport information available on any mode will improve the transparency even further. For the next hour, we are going to discuss about this reality in this eDelivery stage, where we are now hand-to-hand with Walter Trzek, who will moderate this debate. He's CEO and owner of Document Exchange Network and has over 35 years experience as a consultant in the digital commerce and logistics industry. So welcome and thanks for joining us. You can go on when you want.
Thank you very much indeed. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. Welcome to this session. Couldn't be more timely, because we all, of course, know that there is a perfect storm creating. Perfect storm basically means that we are facing crises. The Ukraine, the energy crisis, inflation is coming in, supply chain disruption is happening. So we don't know what the future might bring. Is that a challenge? Is that a curse? We'll see. The session today is on e-commerce-driven transport and delivery. We will focus on e-commerce, the B2C supply, and the mandatory exchange of data in advance on each and every item. Unfortunately, our colleagues from the Universal Postal Union could not join us today out of unexpected reasons, but I'm very happy to say that they handed over a lot of very interesting brand new material on e-commerce and trends in the market, which we will elaborate. And then further on in the sessions, I have the pleasure to hand over to Mr. Bruno Gadal. He is a Director of Standardization at the DPD Group, La Poste, and also Madame Karin Ann Allen, Associate Director Sustainability of the DPD Group, La Poste, because we are twinning digitalization and the Green Deal. Data without traceability of each and every item must be taken into account when we measure the footprint, the parcel footprint on each and every item in all transport modes. And with that, let me just introduce and this is our basis, this is our source of all the knowledge we can share with you today. So, of course, it is the special organization of the United Nations responsible for the postal sector. This is the UPU, the Universal Postal Union. It's for the whole postal sector, and I have the pleasure there to be the chair of the consultative committee. From the 1st of July this year onwards, I'm responsible for allowing access to the Universal Postal Union for all wider sector players. Now, who is that? These are transport and supply chain management companies, suppliers to the postal sector, data companies, customs companies, VAT companies, addressing companies, the unions, handicapped people, those guys. European Union, DG TaxSuit, a main driver for customs and VAT in the European Union, developing the European customs data model. For each and every cross-border parcel, data is now mandatory and has to be sent in advance to monitor, to look into the trade flows in e-commerce. DG Move, responsible for freight and transport in Europe. There is a totally new legislation coming in 2024. All information in all transport modes has to be digital even before transport or freight can happen. Very important. The date is 2024, and if you're in the field of freight and transport, get ready for that. It'll change your business model. European standardization, I have the pleasure to be today witnessed by my chair. The chair of the European Postal Standardization is here. I'm just responsible for data for postal services, so this is data related to e-commerce and also switching to freight and transport. Associations down there, Ecommerce Europe, I have the pleasure and honor to be the co-chair of the e-logistics and taxation working committee of Ecommerce Europe. Ecommerce Europe represents 150,000 European e-commerce companies. So I'm basically constantly on the telephone. Logistic Natives is a German one. Austrian Standards is my home base in Austria. I'm chairing the committees there. So this is the knowledge base we will guide you through, and also our environment where we can share brand new information to your benefit. This is the picture. In short, the first leg is export, meaning that this is the stage where commercial items, goods, are put into little boxes, express items, parcels, packets, more or less driven by electronic interfaces. We all know them as marketplaces, web shops, those guys. This is where the parcels actually start to exist, and you see all these little green and blue and red boxes down there. Well, these are all data exchange points. So even before the parcel exists, data is there. And there are 8 and 9 different data points which are mandatory. If you don't have them, you can't unload that into a plane. You are not allowed crossing the borders for customs and import duty reasons. You have a whole lot of problems or severe additional costs. And then it moves into the leg 2, the international transport. They are the switches between the single postal item for courier, express, parcel, and postal items to freight, all transport modes. It's land transport, it's maritime, it's rail, it's air transport. They have different harmonized standards and might even use different data. But that has to be seamless. And because our end consumers, they would like to have their goods they purchased from outside the European Union or using drop shipping or within the European Union, possibly at the closest possible time. 24 hours? 48 hours? 72 hours? I need it now. And then the famous leg 3. Well, this means delivery in the country of destination. Country of destination means that in some cases it's actually injected because it was all freight and transport previously, and only the last leg is delivery. Again, standards, because our consumers have certain preferences. I might not be at home during my work time. I want unattended delivery. What is unattended delivery? Unattended delivery are boxes, parcel stations, parcel boxes, drop-off locations, making it even cheaper for the parcel carriers because they do not have to go twice or 3 times to my location or leave this famous little note saying, find your parcel somewhere. Yeah, we don't like that. So this is the whole picture of digitalization. So what have we achieved right now? We have achieved the full digitalization of this and the full digitalization of that. And what about the middle? Well, this is coming 2024. But the good news is, without data in advance, you are not even allowed to ship goods. So be aware, if you are keeping stock, if you are a facilitator of warehousing, that data should be there because it's a prerequisite and it is then put into a manifest. A manifest for the first leg, a manifest for the transport mode, a manifest helping delivery operators at the last leg to fulfill the customer's expectations. Now, that's the first big thing. I said I bring you the latest news about the trends in e-commerce. Very interesting. Very interesting. So one of my members, future members, MasterCard in the Universal Postal Union, shared this with me. This is United States retail, and what you see is during the pandemic, people were at home and were buying lots online. We know that. I'm one of those customers myself, right? But the interesting thing is, it was already predicted by gardeners and other specialists that there's a clear line of development and growth in the US. So when the pandemic stopped or was mainly ignored, it went back to the growth predicted. So we are back to where we have been prior to COVID, just on a slightly higher level within the prediction. And the same also in Brazil. They're lagging behind a bit, yes, but they are getting there. So this growth rate is there, even in times of a storm approaching. So the most important message here is look into the inflation rate and make sure it's in your contracts. Very important. So this is the International Monetary Fund looking into Brazil. It's, of course, a global phenomenon on a different level than the US, but still the same kind of growth path, 10 to 15% on annual growth. So if you're an e-commerce vendor, you are in the market growing for the foreseeable time. How does it look like? Well, if you look into internet access, of course, COVID has been a very interesting growth path. You have the most developed countries like Spain, the US, or France here. You have the developing countries, so they are coming up fast, also together with the least developed countries. So that would be to the south of Spain, North Africa, a very interesting e-commerce related market. If you're dealing there with postal operators or express carriers, they all know the data I'm talking about. Connection to North Africa, therefore, is not that difficult anymore if you know the harmonized data aspect. And of course, the developing countries like Brazil and others. Good news again, also the prediction is quite linear, as already said. So looking back into what we have seen previously here at the US, 2025, 24%. Yeah, but of course there are very special countries as well. Very special countries like China. So for China, the number here would be 52. 52. More than half of all retail in China is e-commerce. And of course, unattended delivery is a given thing. So if you live in one of those big sky-rise, you have a locker system in the basement managing your deliveries. Otherwise, it wouldn't be possible. Yeah? That's, by the way, 5 times more volume than we currently have in Barcelona. Imagine that. Without locker systems, there would be lineups in delivery trucks. When we need other systems, and this is another point I would like to mention here. It's very important to understand data is driving e-commerce and transport and logistics, because data also enables us to come with smart solutions. So the logic link immediately is smart cities, smart rural areas, all to the benefit to the end consumer. So what are then those 6 global trends? And this comes directly out of studies of the World Bank, MasterCard, as you have seen, but also looking into the figures and volume trends in the global postal network and sector. It is safe to say that 90% of all commerce deliveries are made by only 10 courier, express, and parcel operators. But they are newcomers. So the largest 5 of those are the classic ones. So this is DHL, FedEx, UPS, the DPD. But there are also new entrants, very interesting. Costco, Maersk, they're coming fast. They're coming fast, and they're very much linked to a totally new infrastructure, which is the second point. More than 50% of all retail items are managed via an interconnected transcontinental supply chain infrastructure. Who is that? Free zones, bonded warehouses, all managed because the data should be available at the point of entry of any e-commerce item. Very important, 50%. So comparing that with other retail shops outside in the big arena, for instance, on average, they only have 15%. 15% of all retail is locally stored. Only 15%. So we are getting ready for these 52% and still rising like in China. Tracked volumes in the end-to-end Universal Postal Union network have fallen by 50% over the past 2 years. Where are they? They are not in the network of the universal service providers, end-to-end, I have to say. They are somewhere in the network of those postal operators and courier express services, but there is a new system coming up. It's called B2B2C. And that's the link to the 50% managed via interconnected transcontinental networks. So freight and transport facilitators, the leg 2, are cashing in on their mediation position. And they help to decide what is the best way for the injection on the last mile. And there, also the dominant player is the national postal operator, possibly with his parcel and express leg. The fourth one is the majority of B2C items are delivered using harmonized electronic data exchange in advance. And this follows global standards. Global standards mainly driven by the World Customs Organization. Follow the money. Customs, VAT, transport security, product safety. Very important. So you need to know what's in the parcel, but you also must be able to supply the right documents. Compliance, conformity, is that according to the national law? Think of toys for babies. Conformity of color? Babies take these things into their mouth. So there are a lot of national regulations on that. Customs authorities check that in advance because the data is there in advance, and risk assessment also here in Spain is currently built up on that purpose. Fifth point, pre-lodging of electronic documents at item level allows forward harmonization of data for all freight and transport modes. This is the next level of e-commerce-driven transport and logistics. It has to be fully integrated, otherwise additional costs and time loss. That's the reason why Maersk, Costco, Etihad, Turkish Airlines, you name them, are all coming to this. Highly integrated networks to the benefit of the end consumer, 24 hours, 48 hours, 72 hours, right. And the last one, and this is then also the kickoff to hand it over to Bruno and our colleague already online, Karin Ann, is sustainable packaging and the global harmonized measuring, accounting, and reporting of CO2 and greenhouse gas emissions will be achieved using data which is partly already available. The data is there. It has to be brought into perspective, and with that, Bruno, Karin Ann, the floor is yours. Thank you for your attention.
Now, don't worry, I will not come with figures. I think that we have a lot of figures, thanks to Walter, and I think that now it allows us to have a nice picture about the situation and the situation we face currently. So I didn't introduce myself. I am Bruno Gadal, Director of Standardization in DPD Group. I am in the business for more than 15 years, exactly in this part, looking with interoperability processes and standard. I'm chairman of at the European level of the TC 331 postal services now for 2 years. As Walter said, we have a lot of very big important challenge to face in our business that drive a lot of our activities. I will come back on a few of it. So Walter insists on the evolution of regulation at the European level that create new challenges of standardization in order to provide data and to ensure that we will have the correct data at the right period of time. The challenge is in a way for everybody, because the challenge is for e-merchants as well to be able to provide the right data at the right moment in order the different elements of the transport chain to be able to do their job in the right period of time. So if we come back to the evolution of our business, it's clear that the evolution of e-commerce forces us to be able to deal with more and more parcel, to provide more and more services, more and more complex services in very reduced period of time, dealing with the major change we currently face. Walter spoke about it a lot. The evolution of the organization of cities and all the urban logistics we have to create. The fact that the increasing of B2C forces to find new solutions to provide the parcel in time to customers. So we have to deal with the combination of lockers and other pickup shop in order to ensure that everything will be ready on time for the customer. Pollution inside a city is a very important point that forces 4 years to do a lot of things, because it's not today that we have decided to work on this point. This problematic creates a lot of need of standardization in order to facilitate interoperability, at least in all those different steps of the transport chain. And if we come back to the topic we are going to speak about concerning the Green Deal, it's a very important and very interesting topic, because we have to have a correct understanding about our business and what we are doing. And it is one of the most important points we have to face. There is some evidence. It's clear that to put truck on the road is not a good thing for the planet. This is an evidence. After that, there is a lot of very slight problematic that are not so easy to decide and to find the right way to proceed. So, do we have to deliver directly the parcel to the customer? Do we have to use lockers? Do you have to use pickup shop? All those things are very, very complex, and there's no one answer. Because we had a very interesting talk with Walter yesterday evening. We are trying to normalize and to standardize a word that is not standardized at all. And it's very complex because we try to provide technical standard where the infrastructure and the organization of city and all that is not standardized at all. So what the negotiation we have to deal with city is done one by one in bilateral with all cities. And it means that the solution we are going to find in one city will not be the one we are going to have in another city. So it is a great challenge. And after that as well, when we speak about standardization, where to stop the standardization? This is a very important point. If we standardize too much, at the end, we kill the capacity of evolution and the capacity of innovation of all that. So it's a very, very complex system. After that, standardization, okay, it's a good thing. But if you are trying to apply a standard on a word that is not standardized, but it's simple, it doesn't work. So it's simple. So our standard will not be used. So this is the point. So I will leave the floor very soon to Karina that will present to us the work currently ongoing in SEN concerning the reporting of polluant and carbon up to the parcel level, and I will give you a bit of context on this point. As you probably know, there's a lot of things ongoing on this topic and a lot of things going in all stage. So in SEN, we are working on it, on this point, yes, at the European level, but there's a lot of things ongoing as well at the ISO level. The situation we face is that standards that are currently negotiated at the European, at the ISO level, are very, very open and very standardized for all the business, and does not really take in account the need and the problematic of delivering of parcel according to all the parameters we spoke about. The fact that we have to deal with urban logistics and with service more and more complex with the increasing of the delivery. So, as I told you, one of the most important points for us is to fully understand our business and to really understand where we have to act. And if it's a clever idea to act on one point on one other. And the best way for us to go to that is to have a clear understanding about the impact of our business really on the environment, and to go to that. Why do we want to try to work on that at the European level? It's because, as I told you, a lot of things are going in ISO currently, and a lot of things existing, and Karina will come back on all the framework ongoing on that. We had clearly the feeling, according to the talk we have frequently with the Commission at the European level, that they want to go with ISO standard, and it's normal, it fully makes sense. But as I told you, we have the feeling that there's a lack of definition concerning our business, and it is very important for us to define something that will enter inside the global network that will allow us to have the right tool at the right moment to do our job, I would say correctly our job, so mean that we will be able to pilot our activity as we should, and to have a tool as well that will be able to give us information how to improve all we have to do concerning the environmental impact and concerning the increasing of our activity. So I will leave the floor to Karinan now. Karinan, you can introduce yourself, and I leave you the floor.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for those introductions, and perhaps just a few words of introduction to myself. So my name is Karinan, and I work in the Central Sustainability Team at DPD Group. And I'm also working as an expert within the SIN TC331 on what we're calling the parcel delivery environmental footprint, or more simply the PDEF. So I have a couple of slides that I'd like to share with you. So I'll share my screen. Can everybody see the screen? I hope so. Okay, so to get started, and I think the scene has already been very well set by both Bruno and Walter, but perhaps just to add a little bit more context to why at the SIN we decided to start working on this project about a year and a half ago. So I think we've spoken a lot about the changing markets, and especially for the parcel delivery sector, which has been massively impacted by the boom in e-commerce. And I know Walter shared a number of figures, but I think we've seen, for example, that in 2017, the e-commerce market in Europe sat at around 380 billion US dollars, and it's expected to grow to around 950 billion US dollars by 2024. So that's really a significant increase in the size of the market. And I think also importantly, it's good to note that within Europe today, over 2/3 of people in Europe consider themselves to be online shoppers. So the market has changed dramatically. And I think, as Bruno and Walter pointed out, this has really shown and led to a change in our business, where we were predominantly B2B businesses before COVID and the boom in e-commerce. And today, we've seen really a shift in kind of the share of B2C and C2C compared to B2B within our operations. So really, the market has changed fundamentally. At the same time, we've seen the regulatory environment shift too. So regulators, policymakers are really playing a very important role in driving more sustainable practices among businesses, both in Europe and also internationally. And that obviously calls for more detailed, more precise data to be able to demonstrate progress and obviously against objectives and goals that businesses are being asked to set today. And it's not only mandatory regulations that are pushing and calling for more precise and accurate metrics. It's also voluntary reporting standards. So I think chief among those would be the CDP, for example, that's looking at how businesses are managing their climate change risk. And so really there's a call and there's a need for the right metrics to be able to measure, to track, but also to report on progress in terms of more sustainable business practices. Also, I think last but certainly not least is around shifting customer requirements. So as transport operators, we have seen the requests from our shippers and our customers becoming a lot more demanding when it comes to environmental sustainability. So they're looking for partners that are able to work with them to reduce their environmental impact, but they're also looking for more detailed and more accurate information, notably with regards to GHG emissions, to be able to do their own accounting and their own reporting to their different stakeholders. And I think it's also important to note that today, for a company, 80 to around 90% of their environmental and social impacts happen beyond their immediate scope of influence, so beyond their operations and within their supply chain, which really means that we all need to work together to be able to share information in the right way. And so what really that's kind of brought to the fore is the fact that today, and Bruno touched on this, is that we need also the right methodologies, the right metrics and the right standards for the sector to be able to not only track our performance, but also be able to target the right actions there where they're going to make the most sense. So that is really kind of the context and the background to why it seemed so important to us to as a sector to work on a specific methodology. And I think it's also important to note that we're doing this also because we are as a wider transport and logistics sector, not only with regards to the La Poste Group, to the parcel delivery sector. We know today that logistics emissions are set to double between 2015 and 2050. And so in the context of the climate change challenge, it's really important that we have the right data to drive the right action. So we spoke about the need to fill gaps in existing standards. And why is that need so important? And this is something that Bruno touched on. So today within the wider transport sector, emissions tend to be allocated per ton kilometre, which makes sense for the wider sector. However, I think for the parcel delivery sector, it doesn't allow information or data that's granular enough to really demonstrate progress and be able to pinpoint and target action. And that's because today within parcel delivery companies, we very rarely transport goods that weigh a ton. It's most like less than 10 kilometers. So the risk is that we then have potentially distorted data coming out of that method of allocation that also doesn't sufficiently take into account the efforts that the sector is making, for example, to optimize vehicle loading, or even towards transitioning fleets to lower emission options, for example. So really one of the key objectives is to fill that gap in the existing standard landscape by defining a standard that's recognized and that harmonizes the measurement, allocation and disclosure of CO2 and air pollutant emissions per parcel. And that really per parcel aspect is important. I think, we started the discussion this morning speaking about climate change, and really, as we've said now again, the objective is to use data to drive the right action, to reduce emissions across the parcel delivery chain. But ultimately also better information, clearer information is also one way of building trust with our different stakeholders. So obviously with customers, but also with receivers, so that the end consignees, and also with regulatory authorities, suppliers, and our wider stakeholder base. And I think also what's really important is that we can't do this alone, and we really need to be able to also provide clearer, more accurate, and easily understandable information, I think, to final consumers, to help them make more informed and more sustainable buying decisions ultimately. And so that really, I think, kind of rounds out the objectives and what we hope to achieve as a sector in developing this particular standard. So again, we've had some discussion about the number of standards and guidance documents that exist already on the market. And I think it's important to note that with the PDEF, the SIL is not looking to reinvent the wheel. It's not the goal. We're not looking to create any ambiguity in the market. It's rather building on existing methodologies and bringing that next level of precision through the methodology that will allow the parcel delivery sector to better quantify and report on its emissions. So when we say that the standard is built on existing standards, I think chief among those would be the GHG protocol, which is the go-to and the most recognized standard today when it comes to carbon accounting across businesses and organizations globally. Also looking at some existing ISO standards, the 14063, 064, that's already also looking at GHG quantification and reporting. Also very importantly, the EN 16258, which is the existing standard on how to quantify and report emissions for the transport sector. However, today it only focuses on transport operations and doesn't take into consideration, for example, any location or site-based operations. Bruno referenced the ISO 14083, which is the standard that's currently under development at ISO, specifically for freight and passenger transportation, and that is widely built on the 16258, but also on the GLEC framework. And for us, that is very much the reference upon which we're working to align the PDEF, but again, just going that step further in terms of proposing a more relevant allocation method for parcel delivery. So what are we looking at when we take the PDF? So it's for a user, and it would be an operator, so a parcel delivery company, that would use the PDF and take into account any transport or location-based operations that are required for that operator to deliver a parcel. So from the point of pickup right up to the point of final delivery. And so very specifically, what we're looking at for those that are a bit familiar with carbon accounting is scope 1, 2, and 3. So both direct and indirect emissions that come from the use of vehicles. So fuel consumption by either vehicles that the operator will own from the owned fleet, but also from the subcontracted fleet, for example. And again, looking at both first and last mile operations, but also what we're calling core trunking or any long haul or line haul operations too. Again, looking at any processes that also fall into scope, for example, that are associated with logistics sites. So for example, any administrative operations that would be included. But also, for example, any additional processes. So by that we mean, for example, if the operator has had to add any additional packaging to be able to deliver the parcel, that packaging and any waste management would also be included in scope. And I think also what sets the PDF apart today from some of the existing standards is that it's looking not only at GHG or CO2 emissions, but also at air pollutants. And this is really important, I think, again, as a sector that operates quite massively within urban centres and city centres. So the next couple of slides are just rather to really here to provide you with a visual representation of what the PDF is. So as we said, it's looking specifically at emissions that are produced to deliver a single or an individual parcel from the point of pickup right to the point of delivery. And it takes into consideration all the transport operations, so the TOCs, or the location-based operations, which we would call the LOCs within the standard. And again, the idea then is to break that down and to be able to then calculate emissions for each of these, what we call parcel chain elements. So really going into both the direct and indirect emissions that are associated with each one of those parcel chain elements. Just again, another visual representation of what that would look like. So for example, here again, we see the breakdown into the different TOCs and LOCs, the calculation of the emissions, and then again, the allocation of those emissions to each individual parcel. And we'll come now in the next few slides to how how the PDF is recommending that those emissions be allocated per parcel. And finally, then you would sum all of those up and you would have the total emissions that were produced by the transport company to deliver a given parcel. So when we say what would be a better method of allocation rather than a ton kilometre, which I think we've had a look at, maybe it's not the most pertinent or most relevant allocation parameter for the parcel delivery sector, because again, we're dealing with relatively light goods that are delivered to multiple destinations or receivers. And so that could potentially lead then to data that's not specific enough for us to actually be able to demonstrate progress or to target action. So basically, the PDF is looking at allocating emissions in two different ways. So by breaking it down into the different transport operations. So we saw, for example, trunking operations, which are line haul operations, where we would generally use a truck. And the idea there is to combine volume and weight to be able then to allocate emissions to a given parcel. And the reason why we're including volume is because volume would be the limiting factor for the parcel delivery sector when it comes to our environmental impact. So, for example, we would never really reach the maximum payload for a truck, given the average weight of the goods that we transport. However, goods can sometimes be rather bulky, and the idea there is then to be able to take into consideration that volume, which is ultimately the limiting factor. And so, for example, that would also then allow us to kind of also target action, for example, to get rid of the airspace or the empty air in some of these parcels, to really carry on, obviously, reducing packaging that would be required, but then also allowing us as a business or as businesses to be able to maximize the payload. So it's really, again, taking into consideration both the volume and weight for those trunking operations per parcel. Finally, then we would also look at allocating emissions per parcel on the basis of stops for the first and last mile. So again, we don't believe that weight in this case would be the limiting factor. The limiting factor is very much the number of stops that you're able to deliver to in a given delivery round. And so the idea here is that you would quantify total emissions for the delivery round and then allocate those equally to each of the stops. And the idea then is to say, for example, at stop A, 1 parcel was delivered, whereas at stop B, maybe 10 parcels were delivered. So the idea then is, for example, is that we would say, right, for the whole delivery round, X tons of emissions were produced, and you would then divide those by, for example, the 10 stops in the delivery round, and then further allocate emissions to the number of parcels delivered to each stop. And this is a much better reflection of the efforts that the parcel delivery company is making to also bundle deliveries per stop. And this also allows us to see better, and for example, that we have had an increase in B2C deliveries, for example, where you would see then that emissions would be potentially higher per parcel because you're delivering fewer parcels to more stops. And really, again, this is for us to be able to show and to drive towards having to put fewer vehicles on the roads, because we're able to load better and we're able to organize delivery rounds better to an optimized number of stops. Okay, and then we come to the all-important part of reporting. So this is, again, really an important piece of the puzzle. And why is it so important? So we saw earlier today that reporting is obviously really a growing area within the sustainability or the ESG landscape. And having more granular, more accurate data for parcel delivery will also allow us to comply as a sector better with these growing reporting requirements that allow us to also show progress and show the fruit, I guess, of the efforts being made to significantly reduce emissions within parcel delivery. Again, obviously from a customer perspective, it allows the transporter to provide more accurate and standardized reporting on GHG emissions and air pollutant emissions to customers for their parcel. So again, it's also a gauge of trust, I guess, that the information has been calculated and quantified in a standardized and widely accepted way. And finally, I think what's also really important is, again, we come back to this idea of needing data to drive action where it matters the most. So really being able to use the data as an user of the standard and as an operator to identify where your hotspots are, and really take the action that matters to reduce your emissions in those hotspots. And I think what's important is that the PDF as a standard brings the common language to the table, but it's ultimately up to each user to decide how they would report on that information to their different stakeholders. And again, depending on the stakeholder, that may take on different forms. So just very briefly then, in conclusion, I think it's important to note that the PDF has really been built as a forward-looking standard, a standard that a user is able to use today because it meets the current needs, but also preparing the sector for future needs. So notably, for example, around air pollutant emissions. But I think also what's important to note is that the standard does allow some flexibility in terms of the types of data used, the input data, where both primary but also either default or model data is allowed. So for example, if an operator is lacking certain data sets, default data can be used. I think it's also important to note that the PDF has been designed to be widely used. We don't want this to just sit on a shelf. We really want it to be able to drive action within the sector. And that's why it was important for us that it complements the existing carbon standards, or carbon accounting standards, but really kind of driving in and addressing kind of the specific needs of the parcel delivery sector, notably with regards to the allocation parameters. And as I mentioned, it allows some flexibility. Obviously, it's a standard, so it does try to standardize, but there is a little bit of room, as I mentioned, to use default or model data, which I think is a very common practice across the carbon accounting sector. And again, coming back to the all-important topic of actually using data to drive action and to reduce emissions, either as a transporter or as a shipper or as a receiver, to use that information to make or to take the action that is going to allow us to reduce emissions where it matters most. So great, thank you very much. That brings me to the end of the presentation. I don't know if there are any questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much indeed, Karin-Ann. To show you that this is all reality, this is the standard. So it is already in Spain. There will be a conference of postal regulators in charge of the parcel delivery markets in all of Europe on the 30th of June here, in Madrid. So it is top on the agenda of the European regulators, and it is here. So this is the German translation. The English translation, the French translation is done. The Spanish translation will be done as well. It is a European norm, and according to the Postal Service Directive, the law in Europe for the whole e-commerce delivery market, it will be a state of art. So anybody who is involved in e-commerce, either in transport, in freight, warehousing, supply chain, will have to face this standards. Bruno, my question to you, what are the next steps here? So obviously this is not the final standard. If anybody here is interested in the standard, what's the current stage? Can I get involved in that? Can I share my experience? We need experts.
Sure, we always need experts in standardization, it's clear. So the status of e-standard currently is in phase of public inquiry, so it means that the standard is finalized, so it is the final phase of commenting, and we are waiting for the comment till the I think end of June, depending on your country, and we will integrate those comments in the document in the second phase of the year.
Brilliant.
And this document is like say Walter, but not directly integrated inside the standardization request of the European Commission. What does it mean? It means that this standard, when it will be produced, will be published inside the official journal of the European Commission. It means that this standard will be recognized as a state of work and the state of for our business, and could become potentially will enter inside the toolbox of the regulators, the different regulator or European regulator, to use it inside the different regulation that will come in the next year. So this standard will not be mandatory at all. We are in the voluntary world, so there's no doubt about that. The point, as I explained previously, is that we fully believe that our business have a specificity to defend, and as well that if our business want to improve, we have to have this level of definition and level of understanding about what really happened in our world. Currently, in SEN, we are trying to defend in front of the Commission this specificity, in order this specificity to be taken in account. It's not win. So your help will be every time welcome on this point, because it is the beginning of the story.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. we tried very hard to give you a full overview of digitalization, Green Deal, complexity, what's in the pipeline, which is of highest interest to you all. Thank you, Karin Ann, for an excellent presentation. Thank you, Bruno. And with that, back to our moderator. Thank you.
So thank you to each one of you for your explanation. In conclusion, we can say that the perfect storm, you talk about later, this perfect storm, inflation, pandemic, war, climate change, implies a lot of challenges, and you give us the keys to face them. And here we can say also that the adaptation becomes essential, adaptation for the enterprises to adapt to the environment, but as well for this environment, these cities, to adapt to these enterprises and to the reality of an increasing growth for the e-commerce. And to come is still, what to come is still an uncharted territory. And here we can say as well that China is leading the way, so maybe we can learn about their successes, but also about their mistakes. So we have a lot of job to do. Many thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.